Hey, Push, I'm going to take you through the final steps to the Civil War. There's a lot of really important things to understand, and we're going to see that these efforts to compromise are just going to eventually fall apart, okay? So we know what's coming. We have to remember that they didn't. To some extent, I think they knew the inevitability of civil war, but no one wanted it to happen on their watch, and that's why we're going to see this constant drawing of the lines and compromising that eventually will lead to the conflict, which is truly over slavery. And you see that at every turn. So let's kind of break this down. I'm going to start off with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Okay, this is definitely a shift away. What this does is it's going to deal with, we have Kansas and Nebraska both knocking on the door to statehood. Okay, and the issue is, okay, well, these are both above 3630, but there were a lot of slave owners rushing there trying to establish a slave state. And so what we see is Stephen Douglas. He's going to be kind of our new Henry Clay, okay? He wanted to be the new sort of compromiser that comes in here and saves the day. And he's also from Chicago. And what we're going to see with Chicago is kind of vying to be the hub of the Transcontinental Railroad that will eventually connect the, more northeastern United States to California. He wants that to go through Chicago. So he's going to play a little bit of a political game here, and he's going to say to members of Congress, okay, I got a plan. If you support my Transcontinental Railroad going through Chicago, then I will throw my support behind this compromising idea. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act is his compromising idea. What does it do? Well, it proposes two different states, Kansas and Nebraska, that would be divided into two sections. It proposes repealing the Missouri Compromise and allowing what he called popular sovereignty, the people who get there first, to decide if it's going to be slave or free. Okay, so the Missouri Compromise is going to be in place from 1820 to 1854, and it set that line of 3630. This takes that away. So if you say, hey, we're going to let whoever gets there first decide, the slaves or the slave supporters or the people who hate slavery, who do you think that's going to attract? I'll tell you who that's going to attract. The extreme diehard people from both sides. So you're going to have your diehard I love slavery people rushing to Kansas. You're also going to have your diehard I hate slavery people rushing to Kansas. Do you see where this is going? This is why it's called Bloody Kansas. Because literally, Kansas will be an unofficial civil war. And you've got people tearing each other to shreds. You've got people murdering each other. Property damage. This is a huge deal. So ultimately, it is going to completely realign the Democratic Party as well. So we're going to see party realignment. The Whigs will fall apart really over this. And so does the Know Nothing Party. But we do see the emergence of a brand new party, kind of coming out of the collapse of the Whigs and to some extent some of the Know Nothings that formed this new Republican Party. It's going to gain support mostly in the northwestern states. And again, when I say northwestern, we're talking Illinois, we're talking Michigan, even Ohio. But we've got a lot of violence. Our old book said this is really the single biggest step towards a civil war, and I kind of agree with that. It's definitely one of the major factors here. So it's a really big event, okay? Also kind of going on while Bloody Kansas is going on. We have literally members of Congress beating each other up because of slavery, okay? So what happens here is we see Charles Sumner, who's known for being a very staunch abolitionist, okay, and also known for having kind of a personal vendetta against another senator, Andrew Butler from South Carolina. Now, Sumner, I could say, we could definitely say took it a little bit far. He made fun of Andrew Butler's slurred speech because Butler had had a stroke. So it was really personal, and obviously he probably shouldn't have gone there. But look at the language that he uses. Lust for power, hideous offspring of a crime, virgin territory, rape of a virgin territory. I mean, these are really powerful words and powerful imagery that he's pulling into the speech that he gives in Congress in May of 1856. And he really calls out Andrew Butler of South Carolina for his speech. So what then happens next is we get a guy from the House of Representatives, Preston Brooks, who was kind of a relative of Andrew Butler. And he decides, well, he's not going to let this guy get away with saying that about his relative. So he goes after hours into the building and accosts Charles Sumner and beats him so badly that Sumner still suffered kind of massive headaches after this, years after this happened. and there was blood on the floor. You know, I mean, it was a pretty big, violent event. So what we're really going to see, oh, the other thing I forgot to throw in here is that some people in South Carolina, some of the constituents of Andrew Butler and Preston Brooks, sent them both little mini replica canes with the message, next time, hit them harder. Okay, this is what we've come to. We have members of Congress beating each other up. This is bad. So you can really see now we're getting some abolitionists weighing in on this, right? We're getting some transcendentalists weighing in on this. It's become really personal, and it's become very violent. And all of this, it's so obvious to us where this is heading, but they're really, remember, the presidents at the time are not strong. They don't want to take a stand, and we're not going to really see them deal with the issue, which is the problem. This takes us to another major step towards the Civil War, which is the Dred Scott decision. So I want to give you a little background on this case, okay? This is Dred Scott. He was a slave. His master took him from his slave state of Missouri into Wisconsin, where his master ended up dying, okay? So what happens is Dred Scott then petitions for his freedom. Well, the master's, essentially, wife would not give him his freedom. So he files suit. Well, it goes to the state court and then eventually goes to the Supreme Court. So in 1857, Chief Justice Roger Taney ruled two things here, both huge blows to the abolitionist movement. Step number one, he says, you know what? Just because you're in a free state doesn't mean you're free. Those free states have to recognize slavery. They have to recognize that it is legal. They have to recognize it and allow it. And it also said, not only was the Missouri Compromise repealed by Kansas, Nebraska, Taney goes one step further and says, you know what? It was never constitutional to begin with because you should not be able to regulate someone's property. And Congress has no right to restrict slavery from the territories. So from the abolitionist point of view, or even the moderates, they kind of say, well, you're making every state a slave state, which in some ways is really true by this decision. It's forcing those free states to recognize and to some extent support slavery in their state. The other thing, and this is a huge blow to the abolitionist movement and really to civil rights, is Taney's decision said, you know what? You shouldn't even be in my courtroom. You don't get the right to sue because you're black. Free or enslaved doesn't matter. The Constitution and citizenship doesn't apply to anyone who's black, and therefore you shouldn't even be in this courtroom. This shouldn't have even gotten here. Pretty much, why'd you waste my time? Okay, so this is a really big step forward for the slavery. It's going to sort of embolden the slave-owning states, and it's really going to further enrage the abolitionists, and again, take some of those people on the fence, take some of the moderates, especially in these western states, and move them over to the other side. All right, so it's a slow, steady grind here to Fort Sumter that we're seeing. The Lecompton Constitution is what will really break up the Democratic Party. So this is the essentially pro-slavery constitution. What happens in Kansas, as we discussed? Kansas is a hot mess, right? There's all kinds of fighting. There's people murdering each other. In fact, you're going to read in your article, John Brown, we first see him in Kansas, murdering 5 pro-slavery people there. And not just murdering them, Stouffer will explain, he disemboweled them. This is the kind of stuff that's going on when we talk about people that kind of the more extremes from both sides and how they're clashing. All right, it's really violent. It's really intense. And so the Lecompton Constitution was the pro-slavery constitution. In Kansas, essentially, we get to the point where we have 2 different governments both saying they're right. You got your pro-slavery government saying, we're the one. Everybody likes us. Everybody here wants slavery. Popular sovereignty. Everybody here wants slavery. Here's our constitution. You have your anti-slavery constitution of Kansas also claiming that they're right. So what James Buchanan does, this is really what gets him on the list, is usually right at the top of worst presidents in U.S. history. He's going to make this worse. He's going to accept the Lecompton Constitution, despite the fact that there's all kinds of evidence that people have illegally crossed the border from Missouri, slave-owning Missouri, and made up identities and voted in the election. Okay? All kinds of evidence of shenanigans and corruption. And Buchanan's like, yeah, I'm going to take that one. Okay, Stephen Douglas breaks with Buchanan over this, and essentially this is going to break up the entire Democratic Party. So we're going to see the Democrats split. You're going to have your Northern Democrats and your Southern Democrats. And the Northern Democrats are going to want popular sovereignty, let the people decide. Southern Democrats are going to say slavery is a right, nothing can touch it. But now we start to see the emergence of Abraham Lincoln, okay? And he's still not saying I want to get rid of slavery altogether. He is saying I think it's horrible. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. He compared it to a cancer. But he, at this point, in this year, is at least saying, I'm going to let it stay where it is. I just don't want it to spread. The other thing, economics can play a role sometimes. There's a panic of 1857. Remember, said every 10, 20 years, we tend to see a recession. Here's another one, and it definitely hit Northerners harder than Southerners. That's something that's going to embolden those Southerners to kind of start saying, you know what, we don't need them. We don't need them anyway. Forget them. Let's just go on and do our own thing. This is a big game-changing event, okay? And we're going to look a lot at this with the Stouffer article, so I'm not going to focus as much of it in this particular discussion, but don't you worry, we'll talk a lot about John Brown's raid. But it is safe to say that when John Brown leads a raid into Harper's Ferry, Virginia, now it's called West Virginia, but at the time it was Virginia, with the goal of arming slaves and murdering slave owners, this is something that Southerners are going to say, you know what, that's it. That's it. We have to worry about our slaves rising up. Now we got to worry about white guys like them too. Northerners coming down here. So this is going to be a major spark taking us to the secession of South Carolina. Northern abolitionists are going to embrace John Brown. We'll read the words of Henry David Thoreau, who compares him to essentially to Christ. You know, we're going to see there's definitely a lot of emotion surrounding this here. And he'll be seen as a martyr for the abolitionist movement, for sure. So the Lincoln-Douglas debates are a series of debates. Now, this is interesting because these guys agreed to have these debates, but no one at this point is allowed to vote for Senate. So, like, why would they do that? That's kind of weird, right? It was more so they could both get their message out. Douglas, who, they see why they called him the little giant. I think they're definitely accentuating the height difference between these two guys. So Stephen Douglas saw this as a great PR attempt for him to get his voice out there and talk about popular sovereignty. Abraham Lincoln is just trying to, he's the new guy. He's the brand new Republican Party. They're trying to kind of get a face for him out there, get the message out. So that's why they agreed to the series of 7 different debates. And they traveled around Illinois. Now, who wins? Stephen Douglas wins. Abraham Lincoln does not win the Senate race. And when you look at Abraham Lincoln's life, you'll see he fails a lot more than he succeeds. And I think it's really a true testament to his character, his perseverance, and why he's going to be such a strong and impressive president, and one that's going to do great things. So the other thing Stephen Douglas is going to do, though, which is the kiss of death for him in the 1860 election, is he's going to talk about something that becomes known as the Freeport Doctrine. And he's really going to say to his Illinois audience, you know what, slavery is just going to end if people don't enact the Black Code. So this is going to phase out anyway. So let's let popular sovereignty happen. Slavery will fizzle out, and we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so if you're a Southern Democrat, and you hear this Democrat say that, you're not going to support him, are you? Of course not. That doesn't make sense. So he's going to alienate the Southern Democrats and really guarantee that he'll never win the presidency. But this is when Lincoln says a house divided itself cannot stand. He does compare, again, slavery to a cancer, to a great moral problem that is plaguing the country. But he does also say he's willing to let it stay where it is. He just is putting his foot down and saying it shouldn't go into the territories. Now, at this point, that's still a big step forward. That's more than we've heard any other leader say, you know? So that's still, now we look back at that and go, well, that's kind of like, he's being a little wishy-washy. Yeah, he is. But at least he's taking some kind of a stance. But it's a small one. We'll get there. Okay, so Lincoln loses that election, but he does get people's attention. He gets the brand new Republican Party's attention. And so what we're going to see is the Democrats are split. The party is in a disarray. They are split over slavery. So you see your Northern Democrats nominate Stephen Douglas, and your Southern Democrats nominate James Buchanan's vice president, John Breckinridge. Some of the former Whigs come together and kind of play like, you know, la, 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 let's not talk about it. It's not happening. And they nominate a guy named Bell, who is essentially the one called the Constitutional Union Party. This is really a party that's strong only in the Upper South. And it wasn't talking about slavery at all. It was just one that was going to sort of not deal with that and just preserve the Union. Okay. But I think, as you can see, we're way past the point of preserving the Union. And Lincoln recognizes that. But he is the moderate. He's the moderate. Okay. He's not an extreme abolitionist, especially at this point. He'll get there, but he's not yet. So he's still saying, I will not touch slavery where it is. I will let it stay in those states. I just don't want it to spread. Well, the fact that he says, I just don't want it to spread is too much. It's too much for the South. And he wins, although with less than 40% of the votes cast. But once it becomes clear that he is president, South Carolina announces that they are seceding. 10 states will follow. Here's what the map looks like. Gee, divided much, you think? Okay, so Buchanan isn't going to do anything to stop this secession talk or nonsense, and that is going to lead us directly into the next problem, which is Fort Sumter.